Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a journey really to uncover the story of Silphium.
Yes, Silphium.
This lost ancient plant so revered from Herodotus all the way to Hippocrates, celebrated for this just astonishing range of medicinal properties.
Everything from heart disease to infertility, supposedly.
Exactly. So our mission, our goal in this deep dive is to understand why this plant was so crucial, particularly to the city of Cyrene.
Right. How it became their symbol and, the whole mystery around its disappearance. It's quite the story.
It really is. And for you listening, this is a chance to get a fascinating perspective on, well, ancient economies, medicine, ecology, things you don't always hear about. We're mainly drawing from Searching for Silphium, an updated review, and Next Chapter in the Legend of Silphion as sources. Okay, so let's dive in. Where does this story, Silphium and Cyrene, where does it actually start?
Well, geographically, you have to picture Cyrenaica, which is modern-day eastern Libya. It's mostly arid, but with these pockets of fertile land. And it's there, back in the 7th century BCE, that Dorian Greeks from Thera, the island of Thera, set up the colony of Cyrene. Herodotus tells us this was led by Battus I and the Batiad dynasty.
So right from the get-go, Cyrene and Silphium are connected. Their fates intertwined.
Indisputably, yes. Cyrene's whole economy, its prosperity, became directly linked to exporting silphium. We see evidence of this trade really early on, 7th, 6th centuries BCE. But what makes silphium really stand out, especially compared to, say, olive trees or grain, is that it just wouldn't be domesticated.
It just grew wild. You couldn't farm it.
Exactly. It grew wild apparently only on this narrow strip of land, between the hills and the sea, and it resisted all attempts at cultivation, even things like clonal propagation.
Wow.
So this limited supply, combined with what we know was incredibly high demand, just naturally made it a luxury item. Hugely valuable.
How valuable are we talking?
Well, Pliny the Elder actually wrote that it sold at the same rate as silver.
Silver for a plant.
Yep. And that probably wasn't just exaggeration. It reflects this perfect storm of high demand for all its uses and this very limited, uncontrollable supply. Kind of a rare economic situation back then.
Incredible. And its importance wasn't just economic, right? It became a symbol, too.
Oh, absolutely. For hundreds of years, Cyrene put the image of the Silphium plant right on their silver coins. It's this consistent visual symbol, really powerful evidence of how central this plant was to the city's identity, its wealth, everything.
Okay, so we get the economic side, the symbolic weight. But what made it so valuable? What were people actually using it for back then?
Well, ancient writers describe just an amazing array of uses. Lucan, the Roman author, he called it a panacea, like a cure-all.
A cure-all, really?
Yeah, our sources mention it for skin problems, respiratory illnesses, even dog bites, epilepsy. Interestingly, you even see contradictory things, like using it for both hair removal and hair restoration.
That is quite a list. Almost sounds a bit fantastical, doesn't it? But it went beyond that, I gather. Particularly important for reproductive health.
Yes, that's a really crucial part of its story. You have major figures like Dioscorides. His work was foundational for pharmacology, and Cyrannus of Ephesus, Pliny the Elder too. They all describe it being used as a contraceptive.
Okay.
And as an abortifacient, also for menstrual problems, and even to help expel the placenta or a stillborn fetus. So a big role in managing fertility and childbirth.
Right. Now, what about this idea that pops up that Silphium was an aphrodisiac? Is there actually anything to that in the classical sources?
That's interesting because when Ascuti looked into this back in 2004, digging through the Greek and Latin texts, he found basically no direct claims of it being used that way.
Really? So where did that idea come from?
Well, the association seems to be later. Some people speculate maybe the shape of the plant, if it looked sort of phallic or testicular, maybe a visual suggestion thing.
Okay. More about appearance than function, initially at least.
Possibly. The aphrodisiac idea seems to gain more ground much later, maybe around the 11th century with Ibn Sina or Avicenna.
Yeah.
But modern scholars think Avicenna might have actually been talking about Eastern Silphium, which is almost certainly asafoetida, a totally different plant.
I see. So a case of mistaken identity, perhaps?
Could be. And that potential mix-up might have fueled later beliefs, especially maybe in the Victorian era, about Silphium being an aphrodisiac.
That's a really important clarification. So maybe not directly used as an aphrodisiac in classical times, but could there be some other link, an indirect connection to sexual activity?
Well, there is an intriguing possibility. Modern research on related plants, species in the Ferula genus, like Ferula druidiana, has found compounds that seem to help with erectile dysfunction. Now, given the strong consensus among scholars that ancient Silphium was a ferula species,
Okay.
it's plausible, that it had similar properties. So that could explain the later association with sexual potency, even if it wasn't its main gig, so to speak.
That's a subtle point, but yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of related plants, you mentioned asafoetida. That was pretty well known too, right? Wasn't there some joke about it in ancient Athens?
There was. Aristophanes, in one of his comedies, he actually jokes about flatulence being linked to lower Silphium prices.
Flatulence. How does that connect?
Well, it seems strange, but one of the traditional uses for asafoetida, even today in places like India, is precisely for expelling wind from the stomach, gas.
Oh, okay.
And Pliny the Elder himself noted that people used asafoetida as a substitute when Silphium wasn't available. That strongly suggests they were similar, maybe in taste, smell, and possibly medicinal effects, especially digestive ones.
So the joke wasn't just random, it tapped into a real perceived connection between the plants.
Exactly. It wasn't just folklore. There was this practical understanding. And it really seems Silphium was a major player in ancient medicine overall.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Absolutely. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, he used it in a poultice for hernias. Soranus recommended it to induce menstruation. Asclepiades apparently prescribed it for heart disease.
Wow.
And as we mentioned, Dioscorides, in his big work De Materia Medica, he gives this incredibly detailed list. Goiter, sciatica, toothache, intestinal problems, hormonal issues, epilepsy, tetanus, polyps, even things described as malignant tumors. It was seen as remarkably versatile.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around one plant doing all of that, which I guess makes its disappearance even more baffling. When did people start realizing it was vanishing?
The decline seems to have been gradual, but by the late 1st century CE, Pliny the Elder basically considered it extinct, or very nearly so. He tells that story about Emperor Nero getting just a single stalk, treated like this rare curiosity. And obviously that loss must have hit Cyrene's economy hard, being so dependent on it for centuries.
So what do we think happened? Why did it go extinct? You'd think they'd protect something so valuable.
That's the million drachma question, isn't it? Overharvesting is the most common theory. Medicinal historians point to this. Given its value, its wide use, the pressure on the wild plant must have been just immense.
Makes sense.
And the fact that you couldn't cultivate it just made things worse. No way to create a sustainable supply. Plus, it only grew in that limited area, making it really vulnerable.
So, intense demand, limited supply, couldn't farm it. A recipe for disaster.
That seems the most likely scenario based on what we know, yes. But interestingly, there are little counterpoints. Synesius, who was a Cyrenian aristocrat in the 5th century CE, so much later,
Yeah.
he actually claimed he saw the plant and even sent its juice to Constantinople. Now that clashes pretty strongly with the idea it was long extinct by then. Just adds another layer of mystery.
Wow, a sighting centuries later. That really shows how much we maybe don't know. And I take it Silphium is still something academics puzzle over today.
Oh, definitely. People are still writing theses about it, trying to unlock its secrets. And those botanical clues from people like Theophrastus suggesting it belonged to the genus Ferula. That's a really key area of research.
Yeah, ferula connection.
Yes,
Yeah.
because that links it directly to known medicinal plants like asafoetida and galbanum. Dioscorides wrote about medicinal uses for other ferula-derived products too, these oleogum resins.
Right, that ferula link seems crucial, especially when you look at some of the maybe more mythological stories around Silphium, like that one from Pausanias with the Dioscuri.
Ah, yes, the Pausanias story. It's a strange one. He talks about the Dioscuri, Castor, and Pollux visiting this guy Phormyon. When they leave, Phormyon's unmarried daughter disappears. And in her room, they find images of the Dioscuri, a table, and Silphium.
And how do people interpret that? Asclepiades saw Silphium there as a symbol of Cyrene itself, right?
That was his interpretation, yes.
Yeah.
Linking it to the Dioscuri's legendary origins in Cyrene.
But there's maybe another way to read it, tying back to those medicinal uses we talked about. Reproductive health.
Yes, exactly. Given Silphium's documented use as a contraceptive or abortifacient, having it appear in the maiden daughter's room after she vanishes, it could be a subtle nod towards preventing pregnancy, especially with the strong focus on female chastity in ancient Greece. It just offers another lens, thinking about the plant's cultural meaning beyond just medicine or money.
It's just amazing how tangled up this one plant was in ancient life, economy, medicine, myth, social norms. And that connection to modern science through ferula gives us more clues about its actual properties.
It really does. Like we touched on, modern studies show anti-fertility effects in several ferula species. F. asafoetida, F. orientalis, F. jayschkiana, at least in rodents.
Right.
Plus, there are reports of asafoetida resin itself having contraceptive or abortifacient effects in human tests. And then you have F. drudiana, potentially a close relative. They found 31 active compounds in it,
Doing what?
showing various biological activities, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, even partially helping with erectile dysfunction, as we mentioned. All of this strongly suggests that ancient Silphium, assuming it was a ferula, very likely did have similar medicinal powers. It lines up pretty well with what the ancient writers claimed.
So those ancient accounts, while maybe a bit exaggerated sometimes, likely had a real pharmacological basis. It really paints a picture of a plant that was, well, almost indispensable.
I think that's fair to say. Its economic value to Cyrene was huge, its medicinal uses were incredibly broad, especially around reproductive health, and the mystery of its extinction is just enduring. And the evidence pointing to it being a ferula species really does seem to bridge those ancient claims with modern science.
Which brings us to that final, maybe unanswerable question for you, our listener. Considering how incredibly valuable Silphium was, how critical it seemed to ancient society, is it really possible that a plant like that could just completely vanish without leaving a definite trace?
Or could it still be out there, somewhere? Undiscovered, maybe misidentified? Just waiting.
What would it mean if we found it again? Think about that, the implications of such a profound loss, and maybe, just maybe, the potential for rediscovery. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.